The topic I've chosen is the question of whether punishment is an effective behaviour management strategy for children. This topic in and of itself is quite broad and open to interpretation, so for the purpose of this assignment, I've interpreted punishment as either physical punishment or intrusive reactive strategies, which is defined by Allen, Lowe, Brophy and Moore in their 2008 article as seclusion, medication and negative punishment. I'm also focusing my research on children that are younger than 12 years old. I've taken the position that punishment is an ineffective behaviour strategy based on the research I've found. There's limited research available supporting the use of corporal punishment in children, and this is likely for many reasons, one being the ethical issues that would arise from conducting the relevant experiments to prove such a hypothesis. In short, the essence of the background research is that strategies other than physical or medical, unless physiologically unavoidable, must be utilised in order to change children's negative behaviour, and it really becomes more of a question of which non-intrusive strategies are more effective than others. The article I've chosen is Solari, Wells and Siccardi's 2014 entry into the Journal of Public Health, titled Child Behaviour Problems, Parenting Behaviours and Parental Adjustment in Mothers and Fathers in Sweden. The rationale for this article is that the existing literature on child behavioural issues lacks a cultural focus in Sweden. This research addresses that gap by examining Swedish parenting programs and their effectiveness on behaviour. The aim of this article is to examine the relationship between behavioural problems in Swedish children and parenting practices, and to explore whether parent training programs with a Swedish cultural focus would be an effective behaviour management strategy. The hypothesis is predicted that if parenting practices are related to children's behaviour, parent training programs will be an effective behaviour modification strategy. The participants were mothers and fathers of 504 3 to 5 year olds. Mothers were aged between 22 and 49 with a mean age of 35.11. Fathers were aged between 26 and 68 with a mean of 37.85. All participants, excluding one set of parents, were biologically related to the child. 88% of the parents in the sample were born in Sweden, however, all participants identified as Swedish. Participants were selected via convenience sampling from Swedish preschools, and the study employed a between subjects design. Participants completed the following questionnaires: the Iberg Child Behaviour Inventory, the Parenting Sense of Competence Scale, a parenting scale, a parent problem checklist, a dyadic adjustment scale, and the Depression Anxiety Stress Scale. Higher scores on these tests would indicate more behavioural problems or higher levels of parental dissatisfaction and ability. All analysis was performed individually and not as a parental pair. Pearson correlation was used to examine the relationship between reports of child behavioural problems and parental variables, and simple regression analysis was used to explore the independent contribution of each parental variable on child behaviour. What was found was that behavioural problems correlated with parental competence and perception of parenting ability. In both gender samples, the use of overreactive parenting practices was significantly associated with high ratings of child behavioural problems. In the mother's sample, 31% of the variance in child's behaviour issues was accounted for by parental variables compared to 26% of the fathers. What we can conclude from this research is that the hypothesis is sound. Low levels of parental satisfaction, parental overreactivity and intermarital disagreements over parenting practices were the main causes for behaviour issues in children. We can also conclude that the relationship between parenting and child behaviour is bidirectional. That is, that children and parents reinforce each other's negative behaviour, and this creates a cycle of dysfunction. Mothers reported more frequent and problematic behavioural issues than fathers, which is possibly explained by mothers more likely to be the primary child carer. They might also be more inclined to seek help and report issues compared to fathers for cultural reasons. We can also conclude that parenting programs were found to encourage positive and effective parenting practices, and therefore it fits that the implementation of these programs has the potential to improve parenting ability and in turn create better outcomes. The limitations of the study is that it only used parent self-reports, which may contribute to informant bias and a lack of objectivity. The sample is also not representative of the general Swedish population. Participants were largely highly educated, so possibly less likely to engage in ineffective parenting in the first place, and they identified primarily as Swedish, so potentially more likely to adopt Swedish cultural parenting norms compared to those from their home countries. The impact of these limitations is that the study lacks generalisability and the potential to apply the findings to a wider population. The study is important when addressing the issue of managing child behaviour because society currently exists within a framework of the over-medication of children for behavioural issues. These children tend to be disruptive, which not only impairs their own education, but that of their peers in the classroom, making this an important issue. With the current tendency to use medication as a foremost strategy, other less intrusive options need to be looked at. The importance of this article is further highlighted by the focus on the bidirectional behaviour between children and parents. When examining the effectiveness of punishment, it's important to understand that negative child behaviour is not a standalone symptom of dysfunction within a family unit. Rather, it's simultaneously a byproduct and also a catalyst for parental dissatisfaction and incompetence. What let this study down was in part due to the participant selection. A study such as this that seeks to develop a tool that creates better parents and in turn more well-behaved and well-adjusted children must be transferable to a wider parental group. To narrow the selection to parents who are already in the frame of mind to seek help for their parenting abilities and also who are culturally biased to Swedish parenting norms limits the scope of the results. Also, parental self-reporting is troublesome. How truly honest can any parent be to critique their own ability? Who decides who would need such a program? And further, what constitutes successful completion? What's the capacity for follow-up? And where would the funds to support the program come from? On the whole, in order to manage the issue of child behaviour, the onus on educating parents on better management strategies and the recommendations of the study being the implementation of parent training programs is certainly a good place to start.